At an elegant restaurant, my son staged a matchmaking dinner for one cruel purpose: to humiliate me and an overweight woman in front of everyone. A man across the table smirked and said, "You're seriously interested in a woman like her?" Laughter spread around the table. And in that moment, I knew my son had stopped being the boy I raised long ago. But I didn't lower my head. I looked at them calmly and said a few words that made the entire table fall silent. "I am so grateful you are here with me today. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? I genuinely want to know." A small note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is one worth keeping. The jacket had been sitting in the back of my closet for 8 years. I pulled it out by the hanger. Navy blazer, wool blend, the kind of thing you buy when you still believe the right clothes can prepare you for the wrong moments, and held it at arm's length like I was deciding whether to trust it. The last time I wore it was to Celeste's funeral. Before that, to the board meeting, where I signed the papers that turned Harding Capital Group from a name on a lease into something real. 2 of the worst days of my life, one of the best. All in the same jacket. I put it on anyway. The mirror in my bathroom told me what it always told me: 53 years old, gray creeping in at the temples, a face that had learned over decades to give away exactly as much as I chose to give. Not a warm face, not a cold one either. Just a face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by things. Behind me, the apartment stretched out wide and quiet. 14th floor, downtown Hartford. Connecticut, floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, the kind of space a realtor would photograph from 3 angles and call a lifestyle. I called it a place I slept. 4 years here, and still not a single photograph on the walls. Celeste used to say that a man who won't hang pictures is a man who hasn't decided if he's staying. She said a lot of things that turned out to be true about me, just not the things she said to our son. 3 weeks ago, Ethan had called. His voice was warm in a way it rarely was, any more measured, careful, the kind of warmth that takes effort to produce. "Just a small dinner, Dad. Family, a few friends. I've found someone truly special I want to set you up with. A matchmaking dinner, you could call it. It'll be good for you to get out." He'd paused a beat too long before adding, "I think it's time you moved on." My left index finger had started to itch the moment he said it. It always did when someone wasn't telling me the whole truth. I straightened my collar, picked up my keys, and walked out. Meridian sat on the corner of Trumbull and Pearl, the kind of Hartford restaurant that had survived 3 recessions by understanding that certain people in this city would always need a room that felt expensive without being ostentatious. Amber lighting, white tablecloths, wine lists in leather folders, the murmur of conversations that were about money without ever saying the word. I pushed through the glass door at 7:15 and found the table in under 10 seconds, long set for 10, tucked into the back corner near the window. Table 7. I caught the small brass number at the edge of the cloth. Ethan was already standing, and he was smiling the smile of a director who had just seen his actors take their places. "Dad." He moved toward me with both arms slightly open, the greeting of a son performing reunion for an audience. "So glad you made it. I said I would come." I shook his hand rather than accepting the hug. His grip tightened for a half second, a small tell, then released. The table came into focus as he walked me toward it. Madison, Ethan's wife of 4 years, sat beside his empty chair in a dress the color of a stop sign. She glanced up from her phone long enough to offer me a smile I had seen her practice before, then looked back down. Troy Kessler, 32, Broad-shared, the kind of man who peaked socially at 22 and had been trying to recreate it ever since, sat leaned back with a beer and the expression of someone who had paid for a front-row seat and intended to enjoy the show. At the head of the table sat Judge Arthur Pennington. 70 years old, silver-haired, with the unhurried stillness of a man who had spent 4 decades on the bench in Hartford County, deciding when silence was more powerful than speech. Arthur was one of 3 people in this city I trusted without reservation. He held a glass of white wine and had not drunk from it. When our eyes met across the table, he gave me one slow nod, the kind that meant he had already cataloged everything in the room and was waiting to see what I would do with the information. Then I saw her. She sat at the far end of the table beside a chair that had been pushed back from the edge, not dramatically, just 6 inches, maybe 7, but enough. Enough that anyone paying attention would understand the message: this seat was not quite meant to be filled comfortably. The woman was in her early 50s with dark brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was heavily built, an overweight woman whose frame stretched the fabric of the pale green blouse she had clearly chosen with care, a wardrobe meant for comfort born from a life spent standing on her feet in front of hot industrial ovens. Yet despite her size, her posture was straight, not stiff, but the kind of straight that takes practice. The posture of a person who had decided long before walking into this room that she was not going to let anyone see her bend. Her hands rested on her lap. Her jaw was set. Her eyes moved to mine with the calm, measuring look of someone who was deciding whether I was going to be one more disappointment in a long evening. My chest pulled tight, not anger, not yet. Something colder than anger and more deliberate. Ethan stepped beside me and cleared his throat. "Dad," he said loud enough for the whole table, "this is Carolyn." He gestured toward her with a small wave, the kind of gesture you use for things you want people to notice but not take seriously. "Carolyn Briggs." A beat. Then with a smile, he aimed at Troy across the table. "She runs a little bakery over on Elm Street. Does bread, little pastries, that sort of thing." His voice carried the patronizing tone of a man delivering a cruel joke disguised as charity. "Since you've been so lonely, Dad, I thought she'd be this perfect match for you." Troy's mouth spread into a smirk. He glanced at Carolyn's heavy frame, then back to me, laughing openly. "You're seriously interested in a woman like her, Walter? I guess your standards really dropped after all these years. Big night out for her, huh?" Madison pressed her lips together and looked away, but not before I caught the flicker in her eyes, the particular look of a woman who knew something ugly was happening and had decided it was not her problem to stop. Carolyn's chin lifted barely a millimeter, but I caught it. Her hands stayed still on her lap. She did not look at Troy. She did not look at Ethan. She looked at me, steady and without apology, the way a person looks when they have decided to find out what kind of man you are before they decide what to feel about being in the same room as you. The chair was still 6 inches from the table. I walked to it, wrapped one hand around the back, and pulled it forward until the legs met the edge of the tablecloth with a clean, quiet knock. Then I sat down. "Walter Harding," I said, and held out my hand. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late." She looked at my hand for one full second, not hesitating, just looking the way you look before you commit to something. Then she took it. Her grip was firm. Her fingers were cool and slightly rough, the hands of someone who used them every day for real work. "Carolyn," she said, "and you're right on time." Behind me, I heard Ethan sit back down. The smile was still on his face, but something in it had shifted, gone slightly rigid at the edges, like a door that no longer hung quite level on its hinges. At the head of the table, Judge Arthur Pennington raised his wine glass and finally took a drink. Tell me about the bakery, I said to Carolyn, and meant it. Carolyn looked at me the way people look when they're not used to being asked. Not suspicious, not flattered. Just careful the way you are when someone extends a hand and you're still deciding whether it's worth reaching for. It's a small place, she said. 4 tables inside, 1 out front when the weather holds. I opened it in 2019. What made you choose baking? She tilted her head slightly, and for the first time that evening, something in her face eased, not a smile exactly, but the suggestion of one, the way light changes before the sun actually clears the clouds. My grandmother's kitchen, she said. Saturday mornings. She'd start at 5, and by the time I woke up, the whole house smelled like butter and cinnamon. She paused. I chased that smell for 30 years before I figured out I could just make it myself. Before I could respond, Carolyn reached down to the tote bag at her feet and lifted a white pastry box onto the table. It was tied with a thin brown string, and a small printed label on the corner read Briggs's Bakery in clean, simple font. The moment she set it down, a thread of warm cinnamon rose from the seam of the lid and drifted across the table. Troy Kessler made a sharp, mocking sound, a cruel laugh he didn't even bother to hide. He leaned over to Ethan and whispered loudly enough for the table to hear. Well, looking at her, it's pretty obvious she doesn't just sell the inventory, she eats it all, too. No wonder she's so plump. Madison looked at the box, then looked at Ethan with the microscopic raise of one eyebrow, whispering, I guess we know where all those calories went. Ethan smirked at the box the way you smile at a pathetic display. Carolyn's hands stayed flat on the tablecloth. She did not look at Troy. She did not look at Madison. She had set the box down with the quiet certainty of someone who had made something good and was not going to apologize for it. But I watched her jaw tighten for just a moment, watched her press her lips together in that way people do when they are holding something in that deserves to come out. My chest burned. I turned in my chair and caught Betty Winslow's eye across the room. Betty was 68 years old and had worked the floor at Meridian for 22 years, a woman with silver hair pinned back tight and eyes that had seen every variety of human behavior a dining room could produce. She read my look the way she always read looks, instantly, completely. Betty, I said, could you bring some extra plates and a knife? Of course, Mr. Harding. She was already moving. I reached over, untied the brown string, and opened the box myself. 6 cinnamon rolls, golden, and still faintly warm, the glaze set to a soft shine. The smell hit the table fully now, butter cinnamon. Brown sugar, something underneath that I couldn't name but recognized somewhere deep in my chest, the way you recognize a melody before you remember the words. I picked up the serving knife Betty had just set beside me and cut the first roll into quarters. I plated them and slid the dish toward the center of the table. Carolyn made these, I said loudly enough that the whole table heard. Help yourselves. Nobody laughed after that. The conversation shifted or tried to. Ethan steered it toward a development project in East Hartford. Troy talked about a golf trip, and the 2 couples in the middle nodded along with the focus of people who understood their role was to fill space. I let the noise wash around me and talked to Carolyn instead. Where on Elm Street? I asked. Corner of Elm and Farmington. Blue door, you can't miss it. She broke off a small piece of cinnamon roll and held it between her fingers. Saturday mornings are the busiest. I do a fresh batch at 6, and they're usually gone by 9. I stopped. Something moved through my chest, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet shift, like a floorboard settling under weight it had been holding for a long time. Blue door, I said. That's the one. I've been there. Carolyn looked at me, her brown eyes sharpened with the particular focus of someone recalibrating. You have, every Saturday, for almost 2 years. I looked down at the piece of cinnamon roll on my plate, the same glaze, the same pull of warm dough, the same trace of something I had never been able to identify but had driven across Hartford every Saturday morning to find. I always sat by the window, ordered one of these. I lifted the fork, read the paper, never looked up long enough to ask who made them. For a moment, Carolyn forgot to be careful. Her lips parted, and her eyes went wide, genuinely wide. The mask she'd been wearing all evening slipping just far enough to show what was underneath. Her hand came up to her mouth, not to hide a smile, but to hold in something larger than a smile. Her eyes went bright and wet at the corners, and she blinked fast, once, twice, like she was fighting something she hadn't been prepared to feel in this particular room on this particular evening. "The man with the newspaper," she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. "That was me. I made those rolls for you every Saturday, and I never—" She stopped, pressed her fingers against her lips, took one slow breath. "I never knew your name. Now you do." The wetness in her eyes didn't spill, but it came close enough that I had to look down at my plate to give her the privacy of a moment she hadn't asked for and hadn't expected to need. It was Troy Kessler who broke it. Of course it was. He set his beer down on the tablecloth with a deliberate thud, the sound of a man announcing himself, and leaned back in his chair with the loose, comfortable posture of someone who believed the room owed him its attention. "So, Walter." His voice carried the length of the table. "Honest question." He glanced at Carolyn, once quick dismissive the way you glance at furniture, then back to me. "Is this your usual type? I mean, look at her. I thought a man of your stature would at least choose someone who fits in a standard restaurant booth." The question dropped into the space between us like something thrown from height. I felt Madison go still beside her husband. I felt Ethan, and this was the part that hit hardest, the part that made my throat go tight. I felt Ethan not look away. He sat there with his wine glass and watched me, chin slightly raised, waiting. Beside me, Carolyn's right hand moved to the edge of the table. Her fingers curled under the lip of the cloth slowly, quietly, and the knuckles went white. She did not make a sound. She had heard this kind of question before. Maybe not in these exact words, but the shape of it, the weight of it, the specific cruelty of being assessed out loud, in a room full of people who were deciding how much to enjoy it. She knew that shape by heart. I watched her throat move as she swallowed. I watched the small muscle in her jaw flex and release. And I felt something rise in my chest that was not anger. It was colder than anger and more precise, the feeling I got in boardrooms when someone had just made a move they didn't realize was their last one. I set my water glass down, slowly, and looked at Troy Kessler with the full, undivided attention of a man who has decided exactly what he is going to say next. I used all 3 seconds. Troy was still smiling when I started talking, at loose, self-satisfied smile of a man who believed he had just said the cleverest thing in the room and was waiting for the applause. I let him keep the smile for one more breath. Then I spoke. Troy. Just his name. Nothing attached to it. But I said it the way I had learned to say things in 30 years of boardrooms and negotiations, flat, direct, with the particular weight that tells a person the next sentence is not going to be comfortable. His smile didn't disappear. It just stopped moving. "At my age," I said, "you stop measuring people by what's easiest to see. You stop looking at what someone wears, what they weigh, or whether their name means anything to anyone at the table." I kept my voice even, conversational, the way you talk when you want every word to land, without the distraction of volume. A real man doesn't judge a woman's value by the numbers on a scale. He looks at something harder to fake. How a person carries pain without losing themselves. whether they can walk into a room that was meticulously designed to humiliate them and still hold their head level. I paused. Let that sit. Carolyn has something that most people at this table have never had to develop, I said, because most people at this table have never needed to. I looked at Troy directly. So if your question was whether she meets some superficial standard I'm supposed to maintain, at 53 the answer is that your standard and mine stopped being the same thing a long time ago. Troy's smile died completely. He reached for his beer with the careful deliberateness of a man who needed something to do with his hands. I turned to look at Ethan, my son. 31 years old, sitting at the table he had arranged in the restaurant he had chosen, with the people he had selected for maximum effect. He was looking back at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager, caught recalculating, but not yet ready to admit it. And if someone at this table arranged tonight as a performance, I said quietly, I want them to know the only person who looks like a joke right now is the one who wrote the script. The table cracked open with the kind of quiet that has texture to it. You could feel it pressing against the skin. Madison's hand flew to her wine glass, and she took a long drink she clearly needed. One of the couples in the middle suddenly found the breadbasket fascinating. Troy stared into his beer like it contained instructions. Beside me, Carolyn had her eyes cast down toward her plate. Her throat moved. Her shoulders pulled back just slightly, not in defiance, not in relief, but in the way a person's body responds when something they have been bracing against suddenly isn't there anymore. Her eyes were glassy and bright, and when she blinked, I saw her press her lips together hard, the expression of a woman fighting with everything she had, not to fall apart in a room full of people who had already tried to take enough from her tonight. She didn't fall apart. But it was close. Lord, it was close. At the head of the table, Judge Arthur Pennington exhaled slowly through his nose, a sound so small most people wouldn't have noticed it. I noticed it. In 30 years of friendship, I had learned that Arthur Pennington only made that sound when he had seen something he considered just. Ethan recovered the way he always recovered, quickly, smoothly, with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing impressions since childhood. Dad. His voice came out warm again, recalibrated the tension, packaged back up, and stored somewhere out of sight. Nobody meant anything by it. Troy was just, you know how he gets. He gave a small laugh and looked around the table, inviting everyone to agree that this had all been harmless. I just wanted tonight to be good. For everyone. For everyone, I repeated. That's all. I looked at my son and felt my chest tighten with something that had nothing to do with anger. Anger would have been easier. This was the particular ache of recognizing a performance you had watched your child rehearse for years, the charming deflection, the warm tone applied like a coat of paint over something that didn't deserve to be painted over. He had Celeste's facility with surfaces. He had learned to make things look fine the way she had, thoroughly, convincingly, until you forgot to check what was underneath. I'm glad you wanted tonight to be good, I said. We can talk about whether it went according to plan another time. Ethan's jaw tightened for just a moment, one beat gone quickly, and then he lifted his wine glass and shifted the conversation toward a warehouse development in East Hartford. I let him talk. I was watching Madison's phone, which had lit up twice in the past 5 minutes, face up on the tablecloth beside her fork. She hadn't shown it to Ethan. She'd tilted it slightly away from him each time the screen flashed. At the end of the table, Arthur Pennington tapped one finger against the cloth. Once lightly. A small signal I recognized from 30 years of knowing him. It meant I see everything you see. Wait. Ethan had invited Arthur tonight without knowing what Arthur and I were to each other. That was a significant miscalculation. It was not his last one. I saw Carolyn stand up at 8:10. She did it quietly, pushing back her chair, picking up her small clutch, excusing herself in a voice calibrated to attract as little attention as possible. The voice of someone who had decided to leave before anyone noticed and would regroup in the parking lot and drive home alone and tell herself it was fine. I knew that voice. I had heard it in too many forms over too many years to mistake it for anything other than what it was: a person reaching their limit with grace because falling apart in public was not an option they were willing to take. She was halfway to the side hallway when Betty Winslow appeared. Betty moved through this dining room the way she had moved through it for 22 years, unhurried, observant, with the quiet authority of a woman who had watched 1,000 evenings unspool across these tables and knew exactly which ones mattered. She stepped into Carolyn's path not to block her, just to meet her, and placed one hand gently on her forearm. Not a grip, just a touch. The kind that says, "I see you," without making you prove anything. "Honey." Betty's voice was low enough that only Carolyn could hear, but I was close enough to catch it. "I've seen 1,000 dinners in this room. Most of them don't matter." She held Carolyn's gaze with the steady eyes of a woman who had earned the right to say hard things. "Stay for this one." Carolyn stopped walking. I watched her face, the way her expression moved through something complicated, something that started at the eyes and worked its way down. Her chin trembled once quickly before she caught it. Her free hand came up and pressed flat against her sternum, like she was holding something in place inside her chest that had come loose without permission. She stood there for a long moment, breathing. Then she turned around and walked back to the table. She sat down without looking at anyone. She picked up her water glass and drank from it slowly and set it back down with the careful precision of someone reassembling themselves piece by piece. Her eyes were dry. She had won that particular battle, but they were bright in a way that made something in my throat go tight. Betty Winslow caught my eye across the room as she moved back toward the service station. Her expression said nothing and everything. At the same time, the look of a woman who had just done something small that was not small at all and had no interest in being thanked for it. What Betty knew about this restaurant and about the people who had sat at table 7 over the years was something I would not learn until much later. Dessert came and went like a formality nobody believed in. The table had reset itself into the performance of a normal evening. Ethan talked, Troy laughed at intervals. The two couples in the middle filled their assigned roles. But the air had changed in the way air changes after lightning. Everyone could feel it. Nobody said so. Carolyn ate her dessert in careful, measured bites and contributed exactly enough to the conversation to avoid drawing attention. She was good at that, at occupying space without demanding it, at being present, without making anyone uncomfortable enough to look directly at her. It was a skill that took years to develop and spoke to a kind of pain I recognized without being able to name. At 8:45, she set her spoon down and said quietly, "I think I need some air." She picked up her clutch and moved toward the back of the restaurant. I watched her go. I gave her 2 full minutes, long enough to give her privacy, not long enough to leave her standing alone outside in the September dark. Then I pushed back my chair and followed. The back porch of Meridian was a simple wooden deck that overlooked the service alley, and beyond it, the amber glow of Hartford at night. A string of cafe lights ran along the railing. The September air was cool and carried the first real edge of autumn, the kind of chill that reminds you summer has been making promises it was never going to keep. Carolyn stood at the railing with her arms folded across her chest, not because she was cold, I could tell, but because she needed something to hold on to. Her back was to the door. She was staring out at the city lights with the expression of someone having a very serious conversation with themselves. I walked up beside her and rested my forearms on the railing. For a moment, we both looked out at the parking lot below. A car pulled out slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and faded. "You knew from the beginning," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was steady, but stripped of the careful neutrality she'd maintained all evening out here. Without the audience, she sounded like herself. "The chair," I said, 6 inches from the table. The way everyone looked at you when you walked in. Yes, I knew. She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh too sharp for that. "I almost left before you got there." Her fingers tightened against her own arms. "I was sitting in my car for 10 minutes telling myself I was being dramatic." "You weren't being dramatic." "No." Her jaw tightened. "I really wasn't." I looked at the side of her face, the clean line of her profile, against the city light. The way she held her chin level, even now, even out here where nobody was watching, and she could have let it drop. Something in my chest shifted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, and didn't quite have a name for yet. "Why did you stay?" I asked. She turned to look at me, then fully directly, and for the first time all evening, I saw what she had been keeping behind the composure. Her eyes were still bright, still holding the threat of something she refused to let fall. But underneath that, underneath the careful armor of a woman who had learned to absorb things quietly, there was something that looked almost like hope. Fragile, cautious, the kind of hope that's been disappointed enough times to know better, but hasn't quite given up. "Because you walked in, Mom," she said, and pulled that chair to the table. My throat tightened. I turned back to the railing because I needed a second to put something back in its place inside my chest before I trusted my voice again. "I came tonight knowing what Ethan had planned," I said. "I came because I wanted to give him the chance to choose differently." "Did he?" "No." She nodded slowly, like that answer confirmed something she had already suspected. "Neither of us got what we came for tonight." "Maybe not tonight," I said. She looked at me, and this time, for the first time, the corner of her mouth moved into something that was genuinely, quietly a smile. Small, real, the kind that costs something. Then the door behind us opened. Ethan came through it with the energy of a man who had been holding something back all evening and had decided the parking lot was finally private enough to let it out. He was still in his dinner jacket. His tie had been loosened. His eyes moved to Carolyn first, a quick assessing look, then settled on me with the expression I remembered from his teenage years, the one that meant he had prepared a speech. "Dad." His voice was measured, reasonable, the tone of a man performing patience. "Can we talk?" "We're talking." He glanced at Carolyn. The glance was not unkind exactly, but it was pointed, the look of a person indicating that someone else is in the wrong room. "I meant alone." Carolyn's arms unfolded. She straightened and took a small step back, preparing to excuse herself with the reflexive courtesy of someone accustomed to being asked to disappear. "Stay," I said. One word. Not loud. Not a command. Just clear. Carolyn stopped moving. She looked at me for one beat, then planted her feet and stayed exactly where she was. Ethan's expression flickered surprise, quickly suppressed. He exhaled. "Fine." He squared his shoulders and looked at me directly. "I just want you to think about what you're doing. Mom has been gone 8 years. You have a family. Responsibilities. You can't just... Ethan." My voice came out quiet and absolute. He stopped. "Your mother left this family in 2015, I said. "That was her choice. I raised you alone for years after that. I kept her name in this house with respect because you were her son, and you needed that." I held his gaze. Do not stand here and use her name to tell me what I can and cannot do. Something moved across Ethan's face, a crack in the surface, fast and quickly sealed. His chin lifted. You drove her away. The words came out clipped and cold. She told me, in her letters, she said you were cold, that you were always working, that you never stop. My voice broke just slightly, just at the edges, the way a wall develops a hairline fracture under pressure that's been building for years. Ethan heard it. I watched him hear it. Watched something uncertain move through his eyes before the hardness came back to replace it. I had a choice in that moment. I could tell him everything I knew, everything Sylvia was carrying, everything I had not yet read but already suspected. I could put it all on the table right here on this porch in September and watch his certainty collapse in real time. I did not. Some truths need to be delivered in the right room at the right time with the right witnesses. Not on a back porch when someone is still carrying 8 years of grief and using it like a weapon because no one ever told him he didn't have to. We're done for tonight, I said. I touched Carolyn's elbow lightly, the briefest contact, and we walked back inside. In the parking lot, 15 minutes later, Carolyn stopped beside her car, a navy Honda CR, a few years old, practical and clean, and turned to face me. Thank you, she said, for what you said in there, both times. I said what was true. Her eyes went soft and complicated. People usually save the truth for when it doesn't cost them anything. I looked at her in the amber light of the parking lot. This woman who had walked into a room built to diminish her and walked out of it intact, and felt something settle in my chest, like a decision being made without words. Drive safe, Carolyn, I said. She nodded. Got in her car and pulled away. I stood there until her taillights disappeared around the corner of Trumbull Street. Then I took out my phone, opened my conversation with Jerry Patton, and typed 4 words. It's time. Full review. Jerry's response came back in 20 seconds flat. Already started. You sure about this? I looked up at the Hartford sky, clear, cold, no clouds. The kind of September night that feels like a beginning if you let it. I've been sure for 6 months, I typed back. Tonight just confirmed it. I put the phone in my pocket, got into my truck, and drove away from Meridian without looking back. I had given Ethan the evening he wanted. Now I was going to give him the ending he deserved. The next morning, I did what I had done every Saturday for 23 months. I drove to Elm Street. Not because I had planned to, not because I had thought it through on the drive home from Meridian the night before or lain awake deciding it was the right thing to do. I drove to Elm Street because it was Saturday, and on Saturdays my hands found the steering wheel, and my truck found that route the way water finds the lowest path without needing to be told. The blue door of Briggs's Bakery was propped open when I arrived at 8:20. The smell hit me before I even stepped onto the sidewalk, butter and cinnamon, and something warm and yeasty underneath the smell of something made from scratch by someone who gave a damn about what they were making. I had walked through that smell 47 times over 2 years and never once stopped to think about where it came from or who put it there. I pushed the door open. The small bell above it rang familiar light, the same 2 notes it always made. Carolyn was behind the counter. She was wearing her green apron, her hair pulled back, sliding a fresh tray of cinnamon rolls onto the display rack with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this particular motion 10,000 times. She looked up when she heard the bell and stopped, not dramatically, not with a gasp. She just stopped. Her hands still holding the tray, her eyes finding my face with an expression that moved through surprise and landed somewhere more complicated, somewhere between recognition and the careful reluctance to make too much of something before she understood what it meant. You, she said. Me, I said. I walked to the counter, and sat down on the third stool. From the right, the same stool I had sat on every Saturday for almost 2 years without ever consciously choosing it. It was just where I sat. The way the blue door was just the door I walked through, and the cinnamon roll was just the thing I ordered, and the table by the window was just where I read my paper. Except now I knew whose hands had made it. "You've been here before," she said. Still not a question. Her voice was doing the thing it had done on the porch at Meridian, stripped of performance, just direct and real. Every Saturday, nearly 2 years. I folded my hands on the counter. I always ordered the cinnamon roll. Something shifted in her expression, the careful composure cracking just slightly, like light coming through a seam. Table by the window, newspaper, coffee, no milk. I felt something turn over in my chest. "You remembered." "I remember my regulars." Her chin lifted slightly, not defensive, just honest. "I just never knew your name." "You know it now." She held my gaze for one beat, too, and then she turned to the display case and lifted out a cinnamon roll. Fresh from this morning's batch, still faintly warm, the glaze catching the light. She set it on a small white plate in front of me and turned to the coffee station without being asked. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, but I noticed the way she set the coffee pot down, just a half-second longer than necessary, before picking up the carafe. I noticed the very slight extra color along her cheekbones that had nothing to do with the heat of the ovens. She was not as composed as she was pretending to be, and somehow that made everything easier. "We talked for an hour and a half," I said later when I tried to describe that morning to myself. Neither of us mentioned the night before. And that was true. We didn't mention Ethan or Troy or the chair pushed 6 inches from the table. We talked about the bakery, about Hartford, about the particular quality of September light through the front window. We talked the way people talk when they have decided without saying so that some things can wait. Carolyn told me about the call with Lou later that same afternoon, word for word the way Lou had said it, the kind of friend who repeats conversations accurately because she wants you to understand exactly what was meant, not just what was said. Lou Chambers, as everyone who knew her called her, was 49 years old, a charge nurse in the Hartford Medical ER, with 17 years on the floor, and the particular quality of attention that comes from spending nearly 2 decades watching people in the worst moments of their lives. She had known Carolyn since before Roger, through Roger, and significantly better after Roger. She was the kind of friend who said the thing nobody else would say, and loved you anyway when you didn't want to hear it. Her salad sat untouched on the table beside her. Her phone was in her hand. Carolyn had texted her at 9:47 that morning. He came back to the bakery. Walter came in like normal, sat at his usual stool. "Lou, he's been coming here every Saturday for almost 2 years. He just didn't know it was my bakery." Lou had read the message 3 times. Then she called. Carolyn picked up on the second ring. "Before you say anything." "He came back the morning after." Lou's voice came out higher than she intended. "He said it's his Saturday routine. Has been for 2 years." "Carolyn." Lou pressed 2 fingers to her temple. "That either means it's fate or it means something deeply strange. It means he likes cinnamon rolls. Nobody drives across Hartford every Saturday morning for cinnamon rolls. Maybe he does. Maybe he—" Lou stopped, took a breath. "Okay. I need you to hear me right now." She sat forward in her chair, elbows on the table, the posture she used when she needed Carolyn to actually listen instead of deflect. "What happened with the expansion deal in 2022, the one that fell through right before you signed?" The pause on the other end of the line was long enough that Lou felt it in her chest, the particular silence of someone who had swallowed something sharp and learned to live with it. The investor pulled out, Carolyn said finally. Her voice had gone flat and careful. Last minute. Never found out why. Find out, Lou said. Lou, I mean it. Find out. She picked up her fork, stabbed a piece of lettuce, put it back down. Something about this whole setup last night doesn't sit right with me. Why would Ethan Harding go out of his way to humiliate his own father at a dinner table? What's the point, unless there's something bigger underneath it? Another pause. Shorter this time. You've been on the overnight shift too long, Carolyn said. You're looking for the trauma underneath everything. I work in an emergency room, Lou said flatly. There is always trauma underneath everything. That's not pessimism, that's a medical fact. She heard Carolyn exhale the small laugh she made when she was trying not to admit Lou had a point. Just find out about the deal. Promise me. Fine, Carolyn said. I promise. At 3 o'clock that same afternoon, I walked into the offices of Harding Capital Group on the 22nd floor of Hartford Financial Center and found Jerry Patton exactly where I expected to find him, standing in front of the whiteboard flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, marker in hand, surrounded by numbers and names, like a man who had been awake since before the sun came up. Jerry was 55 years old, broad across the shoulders, with salt and pepper hair he never bothered to style, and the direct, unhurried manner of someone who had spent 30 years making complicated things legible. He was the first person I had hired when Harding Capital was nothing but a name on a lease agreement, and the only person besides Arthur Pennington who knew the full shape of what we had built. He turned when he heard me come in. You look like you slept 4 hours, he said. 5, I said. What do we have? He stepped back from the board and let me look. 3 names at the top. Ethan Harding, Madison Harding, Vincent Shade, and Associates Estate and Asset Attorney Hartford. 3 arrows connecting them, and in the lower right corner, written in red marker and underlined twice, Roger Briggs. When did Roger come in? I asked. 3 weeks ago. Jerry capped the marker and set it on the tray. Right around when Ethan first called you about the dinner. I looked at the name. Roger Briggs. A name I did not yet fully know but was already beginning to understand. How connected? Madison Harding's personal email has been in contact with a number registered to Roger Briggs 4 times in the past month. Jerry crossed his arms. We don't have content. Public records only. We don't need content. I pulled out the chair in front of the board and sat down. How much does Ethan think I have? Jerry reached over and tapped the board. The number 847,000 was written in the top left corner. He hired Vincent Shade to assess the Hartford Avenue property 3 months ago. That's the number Shade gave him. That's all he found. And the rest? Held under Harding Capital LLC, 3 subsidiary names, 2 real estate investment trusts. Jerry said it the way he said everything important, evenly, without drama. Clean, invisible to anyone who doesn't know the structure. I nodded slowly. Keep it that way, for now. Jerry studied me for a moment with the look he used when he was deciding whether to say something. You holding up? I looked at the name Roger Briggs on the board and felt a dull, specific nausea that had nothing to do with fear. It was disappointment, the particular flavor of it, that only a parent knows, the kind that doesn't shout, just settles. There's one name you haven't put on the board yet, I said. I know, Jerry said. We'll get to her soon enough. 5 days after the dinner at Meridian, Carolyn and I walked Asylum Avenue at dusk. It was her suggestion, a text that came Wednesday morning. Simple and without ceremony, I'm closing at 5 on Wednesday. There's a good stretch of sidewalk on Asylum if you want to walk. I had read it twice, then typed back. I'll be there at 5:30. The street was beautiful in late September, The maple trees had started their turn, pulling gold and rust from somewhere deep inside themselves, and the light came down through the branches at the particular angle that makes Hartford look like a city that deserves better than its reputation. We walked side by side with our hands in our pockets, and the easy distance of two people still deciding how much space to close. Carolyn had changed out of her work clothes into a dark red sweater and flat black shoes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like herself, not the composed, straight-backed woman from Meridian, not the careful professional behind the bakery counter. Just herself. I found I liked that version best. "He didn't leave because of someone else," she said. She hadn't prefaced it, hadn't warmed up to it. Just started talking about Roger the way you talk about a chapter you've reread enough times that you no longer need to explain where it begins. At first, anyway. He left because he decided I wasn't worth the maintenance anymore. I let that word sit in the air between us for a moment. The maintenance. His word. Her jaw tightened briefly, then released. He said I was letting myself go. After years of long nights baking and the stress of the business, my body changed. I wasn't the thin girl he married. He started making comments about my weight, hiding me from his corporate partners, acting ashamed to sit across from me at restaurants. She gave a short, humorless breath. 11 years. 2 businesses between us. And in the end, my changing appearance made me a line item that cost more than I returned. "How long were you married?" 11 years. That's a long time to be wrong about someone. She glanced at me sideways, quick assessing. Or a long time to be right and not want to admit it. Which one was it? She thought about that, actually thought about it, taking the question seriously, the way she took most things seriously, and I found myself watching her face while she worked through it, the small movements of consideration that most people smooth over in conversation. "Both," she said finally. "At different times. In the beginning, I was wrong. I thought he was steadier than he was. By the end, I knew exactly who he was, and I kept choosing to believe the version of him I'd married instead of the one standing in front of me." She paused. "That's not his fault. That part's on me." I looked straight ahead at the street. "He was a blind fool," I said softly. "A person's heart isn't measured by a waistline." She looked up, a soft flicker of gratitude passing through her eyes. "What about Celeste?" she asked gently. I took one breath. "She left in 2015. Died 2 years later. Car accident upstate New York. I'm sorry." "Don't be." I heard the edge in my own voice and softened it deliberately. "It's complicated. It was always complicated." "It always is," Carolyn said quietly. We walked until the streetlights came on, neither of us suggesting we stop. The following Saturday morning, a young man was waiting for me outside the weight room at Hartford YMCA. He was maybe 26, broad across the shoulders, wearing a gray staff shirt with the YMCA logo on the chest arms, folded, standing slightly to the side of the entrance in a way that made it clear he'd positioned himself there on purpose. He had Carolyn's bone structure, the jaw, the particular set of the eyes, and none of her restraint. He looked at me the way young men look at older men when they've decided not to be impressed and haven't yet figured out that the effort shows. "Mr. Harding." His voice was level. "I'm Noah, Carolyn's son." Noah Briggs, 26 years old, personal trainer at Hartford YMCA, and clearly a young man who had spent the past week deciding what he wanted to say to me and had chosen directness over diplomacy. "I know who you are," I said. "Then you know why I'm here." I held the door and stepped to the side, inviting him out of the doorway. He moved, which told me he had manners even when he was angry. "Tell me anyway," I said. He exhaled through his nose a controlled breath, the kind athletes use. My mother has been through enough. I don't know what you want from her or what your situation actually is, but I'm going to find out. I looked at this young man, the set of his jaw, the hands slightly clenched at his sides, the eyes that were more worried than angry underneath all that determination, and felt something unexpected move through my chest. Not irritation, something warmer than that. He had Carolyn's way of looking directly at the thing that needed to be faced. It was not a small quality. It was, in fact, a rare one. That's fair, I said. Find out. I'm not hiding anything that matters. Noah's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected pushback and didn't know what to do with the absence of it. He studied me for 3 long seconds, jaw working slightly, recalibrating. We'll see, he said finally. He walked away with the stiff-shouldered stride of someone who had braced for a fight and wasn't sure whether not getting one was a victory or a complication. I watched him go and felt a smile move across my face that I kept to myself. I made a mental note to make sure Jerry kept the Harding Capital name buried for at least a few more months. Noah Briggs was going to look, and when he found nothing that would tell him something too, just not yet the right thing. It was Jerry who told me about Vincent Shade's problem 3 weeks later after Shade had already made his decision. Jerry had pieced it together from a contact at the Bar Association. The version he gave me went like this. Vincent was 45 years old, the kind of man who wore custom suits on a Tuesday and thought of it as baseline, not effort. His hair was styled with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had built Shade and Associates into a mid-tier but profitable estate and asset law firm by being thorough, discreet, and very good at understanding what clients actually wanted as opposed to what they said they wanted. He was currently staring at a contract that contained a flaw he had put there himself. The document on his screen was a petition for conservatorship, a legal process in Connecticut that allows a court to appoint someone to manage the financial affairs of a person deemed unable to manage them independently. Ethan Harding had retained Vincent to build the case that his father, Walter Harding, was making erratic financial decisions and should have his asset management reviewed by the court. Vincent had used a template from a New Hampshire case in 2019. It was a mistake he would not have made at 25. Clause 7.3 of the document contained language requiring a voluntary competency declaration, a statement from the subject acknowledging uncertainty about their own decision-making capacity. Under New Hampshire law, this was a valid procedural tool. Under Connecticut General Statute 45A-650, it was not. Connecticut required any competency assessment connected to asset management to be confirmed by an independent licensed physician, not a self-declaration. Without that medical confirmation, the clause was unenforceable, and without Clause 7.3, the entire petition collapsed on procedural grounds before it reached a judge's desk. Vincent had found this problem 6 days ago. He had not fixed it. He sat now in the quiet of his office, the building emptied out around him, the city doing its Friday evening things beyond his window, and tapped one finger against the edge of his desk in a slow, steady rhythm. Not anxious, calculating. Ethan Harding believed his father had less than $1 million in assessable assets. Vincent had done enough quiet research in the past 3 weeks to doubt that very seriously. A man who had built and maintained a company called Harding Capital Group for 20 years, kept it completely invisible to a motivated search, and lived in a modest apartment, driving a used truck, was not a man who had $800,000. That was a man who had learned that visibility was a liability. The question was not whether to fix the contract. The question was which side of this table it was more profitable to sit on. Vincent closed the file without saving the correction. He would make his decision in the weeks ahead. It would not be the decision Ethan Harding was paying him $400 an hour to make. Monday morning came in gray and quiet, the way October mornings do in Hartford, the light thin, the air carrying the first real promise of cold, the city moving with the particular purposefulness of a week that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. The brown envelope was on my desk when I arrived at 7:50. I recognized the return address Peterson and Associates, the private investigation firm Jerry had retained 3 months earlier. I had been waiting for this report, the way you wait for a test result you already suspect the answer to. I took off my coat, set my coffee down, and opened it, standing at the window, with the Hartford skyline pale and flat behind the glass. 20 pages. I read every one without stopping. Ethan Harding. Credit card debt of $67,000 across 4 accounts. 3 failed real estate transactions. In the past 2 years, a condo development in New Britain that lost investors a commercial lease in Glastonbury that folded in 8 months, a residential flip in Wethersfield that sold at a loss. Currently attempting to raise capital for a warehouse conversion project in East Hartford using collateral he did not yet legally possess. Madison Harding. Instagram account with 84,000 followers, built around a Hartford lifestyle brand. Interior design, local restaurants, seasonal content. Monthly operating costs running 40% above documented income. The account was a business that looked successful from the outside and was quietly bleeding from the inside. Vincent Shade, a professional conduct complaint filed against him in New Hampshire in 2021, resolved out-of-court details sealed. The complaint had been filed by a former client in an estate dispute. It had not followed him to Connecticut, but it existed. And then Roger Briggs. I turned to page 17 and felt the muscles across my shoulders pull tight. Roger Briggs, Hartford. A phone number registered in his name had been in contact with Madison Harding's personal email 4 times during September 2025. The same number had been in contact with a second number 1 I did not recognize 6 times over the previous 2 years. I turned to page 18. The second number was traced to a law office in Providence, Rhode Island, a small firm specializing in private financial transfers and asset relocation. The same firm had processed paperwork on behalf of a client named Celeste Harding in 2014, and again in early 2015, the year she left. I set the report down on the desk. I stood at the window and looked out at Hartford and felt my heart drop 1 full beat before it picked back up again. Not grief, not anger. Something colder and more structural, the sensation of watching a picture you thought you understood develop new details in the corners you hadn't examined closely enough. Roger Briggs had been connected to Celeste before he was connected to Carolyn, before he was connected to Ethan, before any of this had a shape I could name. I picked up my phone and called Jerry. "You've read it," he said, before I could speak. "When were you going to tell me about the Providence connection?" "I'm telling you now." His voice was steady but careful, the tone he used when he knew something was going to land hard and was trying to manage the velocity. "I found it Thursday night. I wanted to see the full picture before I brought it to you. Roger Briggs helped Celeste move money out of this marriage." I said it plainly, the way you say things you need to hear out loud before you can fully believe them. In 2014 and 2015. That's what the financial trail suggests. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed. "Pull everything you can find on Roger Briggs. Everything. I don't care how long it takes." "Already running," Jerry said. "Walter, you holding together?" "I'm standing up," I said. "That counts for now." 5 days later, on a Saturday morning, when the October light was thin and gold through the bakery windows, Roger Briggs walked through the blue door of Briggs's Bakery. Carolyn told me about it that same evening, sitting across from me at the small kitchen table in her apartment above the shop. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea she had stopped drinking 20 minutes ago. Her voice was flat and controlled, the voice of a woman recounting something she had already processed enough times to report without falling apart, but not enough times to report without feeling it. "He came in at 9:45, she said. Polo shirt, hair combed. He had flowers, a small bunch of yellow chrysanthemums, like he was dropping in to say hello after a long trip." Her mouth pulled tight at one corner. "There were 5 customers in the shop." "He wanted an audience," I said. "He always wanted an audience." She set the mug down. "He said hi like we'd spoken last week. Like 11 years and a divorce decree were just a misunderstanding we hadn't gotten around to clearing up." Her jaw tightened. "I asked him what he wanted. He said he'd heard I was seeing someone, that he was worried about me." "Worried," I repeated. "His word." Her eyes flashed not with tears, with something sharper. "He said men like you don't, and I told him to get out of my bakery," before he finished the sentence. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the particular focused anger of hearing that someone had stood in the space where Carolyn made things she was proud of and tried to make her feel small inside it. I kept my voice even. "Did he go?" He looked around, saw nobody was going to take his side, picked up his flowers, and left. She exhaled a long, controlled breath that shook just slightly at the end. I stood behind the counter until he was through the door and around the corner. Then I put the coffee pot down because my hands were shaking, and I needed 30 seconds before I trusted myself to pick anything up again. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She looked down at our hands, then up at me. Her eyes were dry but bright, holding something that wanted to overflow but hadn't been given permission yet. "He doesn't have power over your life anymore," I said. "I know that," she said. Then more quietly, "I know that. I just have to remind myself sometimes." 3 days later, at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning, my phone rang. Carolyn's voice came through calm and measured, the voice of someone who had already assessed the situation and decided panic was not a useful response. "My oven's out. Igniter, I think. The wholesale order ships Friday." I was in my truck and pulling onto Elm Street, inside 30 minutes unshaved. Wearing a gray flannel shirt I'd grabbed off the back of the bedroom door, a small toolbox on the passenger seat that I kept in the truck for exactly the kind of problems that couldn't wait for a service call. Carolyn was behind the counter when I pushed through the blue door. She looked at me, then at the toolbox with an expression shown that moved quickly from surprise to something that wasn't quite surprise, the look of a person recalibrating their expectations upward without wanting to make too much of it. "You know how to fix commercial ovens," she said. "I know how to figure out what's broken." I moved past her toward the kitchen. That's usually close enough. The Blodgett was a heavy-duty commercial unit. 6 burners double-deck, the kind of oven that ran 12 hours a day and lasted 20 years if you treated it right. I pulled it away from the wall, got down on the floor with my flashlight, and started at the igniter assembly. Carolyn stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded, watching. "You're going to get that shirt filthy," she said. "It's already not my best shirt." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. 2.5 hours later, the Blodgett fired on the first try. The kitchen filled immediately with the smell of the pilot, catching that clean, sharp smell of gas meeting flame. And then as Carolyn slid the first test tray in, with the slower, warmer smell of dough beginning to rise. She made 2 cups of coffee while I washed my hands at the utility sink. We sat at the corner table in the empty bakery, the shop not open yet, the early morning light yellow and low through the front windows, the city outside just beginning to wake up. "She left in 2015, I said, without planning to. "Celeste, I never fixed what was broken between us the way I just fixed your oven." I looked at the coffee cup in my hands. I thought I had more time. Carolyn reached across the table and placed her hand over mine, not on top, just beside, close enough to touch, without demanding anything. Her fingers were warm from the coffee mug. She didn't say it was okay. She didn't say she was sorry. She just left her hand there and let the quiet be the kind that held something rather than avoided it. That was one of the things about Carolyn. She understood that some things needed to be said in pieces, and she never tried to rush the rest of them out before you were ready. Before I reveal what was inside that envelope and what Walter did with the information that had been hidden from him for 8 years, drop a 7 in the comments. Because what happens next at that dinner table changes everything. A gentle reminder some elements ahead are fictional, woven in purely for depth and reflection. If this kind of story is not for you, you are welcome to step away here. What matters most is that you find content that truly serves you. Jerry Patton and Judge Arthur Pennington had lunch together on the third Thursday of every month, a habit that had started 11 years ago over a shared table at a bar association dinner and had never needed a formal invitation since. Hartford Golf Club, corner table by the window, no phones on the table. That last part was Pennington's rule, and Jerry had never argued with it. They were halfway through their salads when Jerry slid the printed page across the white tablecloth. Pennington set down his fork, picked up the page, and read it without expression. He had the particular stillness of a man who had spent 4 decades on the bench, absorbing information that other people found upsetting, and had learned to process it somewhere internal before letting it reach his face. He read Clause 7.3 twice. Then he set the page down. "This is void under Connecticut General Statute 45A-650, he said. His voice was as even as if he were reading a grocery list. "I know," Jerry said. "Does Shade know?" Jerry picked up his water glass. "He found it 6 days before we did. He chose not to correct it." Pennington looked out at the golf course, the October fairway going gold and brown at the edges, the sky the particular flat white of a New England afternoon that couldn't decide between clouds and sun. "Which means he's either planning to switch sides," he said, "or he's incompetent." "He's not incompetent." "No." Pennington picked up his fork again, stabbed a piece of arugula, set it back down without eating it. "Does Walter know I'm here today?" "Walter knows everything," Jerry said. "He just doesn't always announce it." Pennington almost smiled, a slight movement at the corner of his mouth that came and went quickly, the smile of a man who found things wry rather than funny. "Good." He looked back at Jerry directly. "I want to be useful when the time comes. Tell him that." "I will." Jerry hesitated, the hesitation of a man who had been carrying something and had just reached the point where the weight of it outweighed the comfort of keeping it. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a second page on the table. "Arthur, there's something else." Pennington looked at the second page. His expression did not change, not a flicker, not a blink, but he placed both hands flat on the table in a gesture Jerry had never seen from him before, as if he needed the solidity of the surface beneath his palms. "This is something about Walter," Jerry said quietly. "Something Walter doesn't know yet. Something I should have told him years ago and didn't." His voice dropped lower. "I've been carrying it since 2016. I told myself I was protecting him. I think I was protecting myself from having to watch him hear it." Pennington looked at the page for a long moment. Then he looked at Jerry with the eyes of a man who had seen every variety of human failure and had made his peace with the fact that most of it came from love gone wrong rather than malice. "You'll tell him," Pennington said. It was not a question. Jerry's jaw tightened. "When the time is right." "Jerry." Pennington's voice was gentle but absolute. "The time is always wrong. Tell him anyway." 8 days later, on a Friday evening, when the last light was going out of the West Hartford sky, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized immediately. "I'm at the shop. I need you to come." Sylvia, my sister Sylvia Norwood, had never in 30 years sent me a message asking me to come to her. I had always been the one who came to her for holidays, for difficult conversations, for the particular brand of family maintenance that falls to the older sibling by unspoken agreement. In all that time, she had never reversed the direction. I drove to West Hartford Avenue in 20 minutes. Sylvia was standing outside the front door of Norwood Pharmacy, her shop, the one she had built from a single rented counter space into a full, independent pharmacy over 15 years. The sign above the door was dark. She had locked up early. She was wearing her brown trench coat, her handbag over her left shoulder, standing very still in the way she stood when she had made a decision she wasn't sure she could walk back from. She was 50 years old, my sister. She had our father's dark eyes and our mother's jaw, and the particular quality of composure that our family had always mistaken for strength, when really it was just a very good wall. "Walter," she said. "Sylvia." I looked at her face, the eyes that were holding something back. With considerable effort, the chin that was steady, but only just. "What's wrong?" "Get in the car," she said. "Your car? I don't want to do this standing on the street." We sat in my truck with the engine off and the October dark settling around us. Sylvia put her handbag on her lap and opened it. She did not take anything out. She looked down into it the way people look when they need a moment before they can look up again. "There are things about Celeste," she said. "Things Ethan believes because she told him. And things Ethan believes because I let him keep believing them when I should have said something." Her voice cracked on the last 3 words, a small fracture quickly sealed. "I should have said something a long time ago, Walter." My throat tightened. I kept my hands on the steering wheel because I needed something solid to hold on to while my chest did what it was doing. "How long have you known?" "Since 2017. She exhaled through her nose a shaky breath that she tried to make steady and couldn't quite manage. "She called me 3 weeks before the accident. She asked me to keep something for her. Letters." She pressed her lips together. "2 sets. I have them both." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were finally breathing again." Her voice broke fully, this time, not a crack, a break. The sound of something that had been held under pressure for 8 years finally giving way. Her eyes flooded, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, hard, like she could push the emotion back inside if she just applied enough force. "You had started sleeping through the night. You had started working again. I thought I told myself that telling you would just tear it all back open, and you had already—" She stopped, drew a sharp breath. "I was protecting you." "You were protecting her," I said. Sylvia did not deny it. I sat with that for a moment, the particular weight of it, the specific ache of learning that the people who love you can fail you quietly for years while believing they are doing you a kindness. "What's in the letters?" I asked. "I'll show you," she said. "Not tonight. I need 1 more week to be ready." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were red and wet and honest in a way I had not seen from her in years. "I'm sorry, Walter. I'm so sorry." I looked at my sister, this woman who had carried something sharp inside her for 8 years and had worn it like it wasn't there, and felt the anger I might have had dissolve into something more complicated, something that was tired and sad, and underneath all of that, still love. "1 week," I said. She nodded and pressed her hand over her eyes for a moment, breathing. Then she straightened, picked up her bag, and got out of the truck. 2 Saturdays later, at the entrance to the Hartford YMCA weight room, Noah Briggs was waiting for me again. This time he was standing to the side, not blocking the door, just present. 2 cups of takeout coffee in his hands. He held one out when I got close. I took it. "You brought coffee?" "I figured I owed you something for last time," he said. "I was kind of aggressive." "You were protective." I pulled the lid tab. "That's different." We walked the path that ran along the edge of the YMCA parking lot and out toward the small green space behind it. Noah drank his coffee and looked straight ahead and said without preamble, "My mom looks different lately." "Different how?" "Less careful." He turned the cup in his hands. "She's been careful for so long she forgot what it felt like not to be. Like she was always braced for something." He glanced at me sideways. "She's not bracing as much." Something moved in my chest, warm and quiet. "Is that good?" "Yeah." He said it simply without qualification. "Yeah, I think it is." We walked a little further. Then Noah stopped and faced me directly, the same directness as the first time, but without the tension in his jaw. "Why her?" he asked. "Out of everyone. Why my mother?" I looked at this young man, 26 years old, his mother's honesty in his face, trying to understand something that mattered to him, and I told him the truth. "Because she walked into a room that was built to break her," I said, "and she didn't break. Because she made me laugh at a table where I hadn't expected to laugh." I looked at the coffee cup in my hands. "And because for 2 years she made the one thing I looked forward to every week without knowing I was looking forward to it. And she did it without needing anyone to notice." Noah was quiet for a moment. Not the closed quiet of resistance, but the open quiet of someone actually absorbing something. "Okay," he said. One word. But the shoulders had come down, and the jaw had unclenched. And when he looked at me this time, the suspicion had gone somewhere else and left something more like consideration in its place. "She says I'm stubborn," he added. "Same thing, sure," I said. "Different name." Noah almost smiled. It was the best thing I had seen all week. Sylvia called on a Tuesday morning at 8:43, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she has been awake for hours rehearsing what she is about to say. "I'm ready, Passon," she said. "Come now, before I change my mind." I drove to Norwood Pharmacy in 18 minutes. The front sign was still dark, she hadn't opened yet. She was waiting at the back entrance, the brown trench coat again, both hands gripping her handbag strap like it was the only thing keeping her upright. When she saw my truck pull into the alley, something in her face collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of 3 seconds. "Inside," she said. The back room of the pharmacy was small and smelled like antiseptic and cardboard. A metal prep table ran along one wall. On it, laid flat with the careful placement of something that had been moved and repositioned many times over many years, were 2 envelopes. Both sealed, both white, both addressed in handwriting I recognized from memory from birthday cards and grocery lists, and one note left on the kitchen counter in 2014 that I had kept in my desk drawer for 11 years, Celeste's handwriting. My legs kept moving forward, but the rest of me did something I couldn't quite control. My chest locked up hard like something had reached inside and grabbed a fistful. I stopped at the edge of the table and looked at the envelopes without touching them. "The one on the left is for you," Sylvia said. Her voice was barely holding together. She wrote it in October 2017, 3 weeks before the accident. She pressed one hand flat against her collarbone and took a breath that shook on the way in. "The one on the right, I don't know everything that's in it. She told me it was about money, about decisions she made in 2014 and 2015 that she was ashamed of." "Roger Briggs," I said. Sylvia's eyes flooded immediately, the kind of flooding that doesn't ask permission, that just arrives. "She told me enough for me to guess," she said, her voice breaking cleanly on the last word. I should have told you 8 years ago, Walter. I knew something was wrong, and I was so afraid of what it would do to you. She pressed her fingers hard against her lips to stop the rest of it coming out. But her shoulders were shaking, and her chin was trembling, and all the composure she had spent a decade building came apart right there in the back room of her pharmacy at 8 in the morning. I reached over and put my hand on her shoulder. Sylvia, my voice came out rougher than I intended. Stop. I'm sorry, she said against her fingers. I'm so sorry. I know. I squeezed her shoulder once, firm and deliberate. I know you are. I picked up the envelope with my name on it, Celeste's handwriting. Small slightly rushed the loop on the W that I had always recognized across a room. My throat tightened so fast it surprised me even now, even after everything my body still responded to her handwriting, like muscle memory that hadn't gotten the update. I did not open it there. I put both envelopes inside my jacket, thanked my sister, and left before either of us said something we'd need to recover from. I opened Celeste's letter in my truck in the alley behind the pharmacy with the engine off, and the October sky pressing flat and gray through the windshield. I read it twice. By the time I folded it along its original crease and slid it back into the envelope, my jaw ached from being held too tight, and my eyes were burning in that dry, specific way that comes from emotions that never quite reach the surface but press hard against it from the inside. I did not cry. I wanted to. The wanting sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down and couldn't carry comfortably. I drove to Harding Capital. Jerry had the full packet on the conference table when I walked in at 10:15:38, pages tabbed and organized, the way Jerry organized everything that mattered. He looked at my face when I came through the door and said nothing about what he saw there. He pulled out the chair across from him and waited. I set both envelopes on the table between us. Jerry looked at them, then at me. She gave them to you. This morning. I sat down. My hands were steady. The rest of me was working at it. Tell me about Roger Briggs and the Providence account. Everything, don't manage it. Jerry opened the packet to tab 4. He tapped the page with 2 fingers. Between January 2014 and March 2015, 4 separate wire transfers totaling $47,000 moved from a holding account connected to Harding Capital into a Providence LLC registered under a name we traced back to Roger Briggs. His voice was even and precise. Ethan authorized access to that holding account in November 2013, the year before the transfers started. He was 20 years old. I don't know if he understood what he was enabling. The stone in my chest shifted. And Celeste, Jerry exhaled through his nose, controlled, deliberate. Her signature appears on one of the transfer authorizations. The second one, February 2014. There it was. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and breathed through it in slow, out slower. My eyes stung. My throat pulled tight. I had suspected it since page 17 of the PI report, since I had seen the Providence name and felt the picture developing in the corners. But suspecting something and having it confirmed by a man you trust sitting 3 feet across a table from you are 2 entirely different experiences. She knew she'd done wrong, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. That's what the letter is. She knew, and she couldn't figure out how to tell me, and she ran out of time. Jerry set the pen down. Walter, I'm not falling apart, I said. Give me a minute. He gave me the minute. He didn't look away, didn't shuffle papers, didn't perform patience. He just sat there and let me have it, the full, unmanaged weight of it, the way only someone who has known you long enough to know you don't need saving can do. When the minute was up, I straightened in the chair and looked at him directly. What does Ethan know about how much I actually have? Jerry's expression shifted into the focused clarity I relied on. He reached for tab 1. He knows about the Hartford Avenue property. Shade assessed it at $847,000. He paused. He does not know about the 7 subsidiary holdings, the 2 REITs, or the Harding Capital operating accounts. Keep it that way, I said. For now, we stay quiet. 30 days, then we move. Jerry nodded. And Roger Briggs. I thought about Carolyn at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea, telling me her voice had been shaking too badly to pick up the coffee pot after Roger walked out. I thought about yellow chrysanthemums chosen for an audience. I thought about a Providence LLC and a wire transfer dated February 2014. Roger Briggs, I said, is going to find out that quiet is not the same as gone. Carolyn picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear the bakery behind her, the soft clatter of sheet pans, the low hum of the blodgett, running at full temperature, the familiar ambient noise of a Saturday morning in full operation. I need to show you something, I said. I'm coming over. A beat. Then, how soon? 20 minutes. She was pulling a tray from the oven when I pushed through the blue door. She looked up, read something in my face immediately, and set the tray down on the cooling rack, with more care than the situation required, the careful deliberateness of a person buying themselves 3 seconds to prepare. That face, though, she said, is not a good face. No, I agreed. It's not. I waited until the last customer at the window table paid and left. Then I sat at the counter and opened the manila folder Jerry had given me. I laid it flat between us, the Providence LLC documentation, the wire transfer records, the 4 pages that had Roger Briggs's name on them in one form or another. Carolyn looked at the first page, then the second. Her hands, which had been resting loose on the counter, slowly curled inward until her knuckles pressed white against the laminate surface. She did not make a sound for a long moment, but her breathing changed, deepening and tightening, at the same time the breathing of someone absorbing something that requires physical effort to process. A Providence LLC, she said finally. Her voice came out flat and careful, stripped of everything except the words themselves. $47,000. Registered under a name that traces back to Roger. Her jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle move beneath her skin. I didn't know about any LLC. She pressed her fingers flat against the page as if she needed to feel the paper to believe it was real. 11 years of marriage, Walter. 2 businesses between us. I did the books for the bakery myself every single month, and I never... Her voice cracked sharp, sudden like a branch going under too much weight. Her eyes flooded instantly, and she blinked hard twice, fighting it. I thought I was just the bakery wife. I thought he left because I wasn't enough. I built a whole story around that. That story wasn't true, I said. The tears came then, not slowly, not politely. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a sound came out of her that she clearly hadn't meant to make, something between a soh and a sharp exhale, and she grabbed the edge of the counter with her other hand because her knees were going and she needed something solid beneath her. Her whole body shook with it, the particular shaking of someone releasing 8 years of a wrong explanation all at once. Hey. I stood up and moved around the counter. I put both hands on her shoulders, firm and steady. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? None of this is yours. She pressed her fingers harder against her mouth and nodded a fast, small nod. The nod of a woman who desperately wanted to believe something and was working hard to let herself. Her eyes were red and streaming, and she looked nothing like the composed, straight-backed woman who had walked into Meridian and held her chin level through everything Ethan and Troy had thrown at her. She looked like a person who had finally been given permission to put something down that she had been carrying for far too long. I handed her the dish towel from the counter hook. She pressed it against her eyes and laughed one short, watery laugh at herself for crying into a kitchen towel in her own bakery on a Saturday morning. "I'm a mess," she said, her voice still thick. "You're allowed," I said. Monday morning arrived cold and purposeful. I was in Jerry's office by 9, the full 38-page packet open between us, the Providence records laid out in order across the conference table like a case being built, because that was exactly what it was. Jerry tapped page 22. The LLC received the $47,000 in 4 installments. The last transfer cleared March 2015. He looked up. 3 months before Ethan introduced Roger Briggs to Vincent Shade for the first time. My jaw tightened. So Ethan knew about the Providence connection. He had to. Jerry's voice was measured but direct. He authorized the account access in 2013. He made the introduction in 2015. Those two things don't sit in the same timeline by accident. I stood up and walked to the window. Hartford was doing what Hartford does on cold October mornings, moving fast, and gray people pulling their coats tighter, the city already 3 hours into a day that hadn't decided if it was going to be decent or difficult. I looked at my reflection in the glass and barely recognized the expression on my face. Not anger. Something colder and more patient than anger. "We go quiet for 30 days, I said. "No moves, no signals. Let them think they have the picture they think they have." And then I turned from the window and looked at Jerry directly. "Then we give them a dinner they didn't plan for." Jerry reached for his pen. His mouth pulled into the small, tight expression he wore when a plan had just become real. December 12th, I said. Meridian, table 7. Jerry called at 7:42 on a Wednesday morning, and the tone of his voice told me before the words did that something had moved. "Ethan filed," he said. "Yesterday afternoon. Superior Court, Hartford County. Petition for conservatorship, financial incompetence, erratic spending, cognitive decline." He paused one beat. He used Shade's paperwork. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter with a steadiness I had to manufacture. My chest pulled tight, not with fear, with the particular nauseating weight of watching your own child use your name in a courthouse document as evidence against you. I pressed one hand flat against the counter and breathed through it. "How long does he have before the court dismisses it?" I asked. "Pennington says 60 days, maybe less. The Clause 7.3 problem makes the whole petition procedurally weak. It collapses before it reaches a judge's desk, if anyone looks closely." Jerry's voice was steady but careful. "The problem isn't legal. The problem is if it leaks. If the Hartford Courant gets one paragraph about a conservatorship filing against Walter Harding, the story writes itself. It won't leak," I said, "because we're not going to react in a way that gives anyone a reason to look. Walter, call Pennington. Tell him I want him at the December dinner." I moved to the window and looked out at the Hartford morning gray, purposeful, indifferent. And Jerry. Find me every transaction Roger Briggs touched after 2013. Every single one. "Already running," Jerry said. "You sure you're holding together?" I thought about the letter in my jacket pocket. The one with Celeste's handwriting on the outside and the truth on the inside that I had read twice and not yet found a way to put down. "Ask me in 30 days, I said, and ended the call. I stood at the window for a long time after that. The city below moved at its usual pace, indifferent, unhurried, asking nothing of me. I was grateful for that. I needed a few minutes to be a man who had just learned his son filed a court document calling him incompetent before I could go back to being the man who already knew what came next. It took 4 minutes. Then I picked up my keys and went to work. Carolyn called on a Friday evening at 7:19, and her voice carried the particular tension of someone who had been sitting with something uncomfortable all day and had finally run out of patience with carrying it alone. "Madison called me," she said, "an hour ago." I pulled onto the shoulder of Flatbush Avenue and put the truck in park. "What did she say?" "She said she didn't know." Carolyn's voice was unsteady, not broken, but strained at the edges like fabric pulled one thread too many. She said Ethan had been lying to her too. That she didn't know about Roger, didn't know about the Providence account, didn't know about the filing. A short, sharp breath. She was crying Walter. She sounded genuinely terrified. "What did you tell her?" "I didn't know what to tell her. That's why I'm calling you." "Tell her to call Pennington," I said. "His number is in the contacts I sent you last week. Tell her to call him before she talks to Ethan again." Carolyn exhaled long, slow, the exhale of someone letting go of a problem they had been gripping too tightly. "And if she doesn't, then that's her choice and we've done what we can." I paused. "How are you doing with all of this?" A silence not empty, just full of something she was working out how to say. "Then I'm scared. Not of Ethan. Not even of Roger, really." Her voice dropped lower, tighter. "I'm scared of what happens to Noah if this becomes public. He works at the YMCA. He has a life here. His father's name my name if this ends up in a newspaper." "It won't get to Noah," I said. "I promise you that." "You can't promise that. I can promise that I will do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't." I pulled back onto the road and drove. "I'm coming over." She was at the back door of the bakery when I arrived. The shop dark and closed, the alley quiet. The October night pressing cold and still around the building. Her eyes were red at the rims, mascara faint along her cheekbones, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. She looked like she had been holding it together all day through sheer determination and had just reached the very end of her reserve. "I hate this," she said, and her voice finally broke cleanly, fully, the way it breaks when you stop fighting it. "I hate that my life is that Roger is still somehow in the middle of everything, even now, even after all of it." "He won't be for much longer," I said. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth and laughed one short, wet, exhausted laugh and shook her head like she wanted to believe me and wasn't quite there yet. I took both her hands in mine and held them until the shaking slowed. "Noah is strong," I said quietly, "because you raised him that way. Whatever comes next, that part doesn't change." She looked up at me, her eyes bright and wet and tired, and something else underneath all of that, something that had been growing quietly for weeks, in the spaces between difficult conversations and early mornings and cold October nights outside bakery back doors. She rested her forehead against my shoulder and let out one long, steady breath. The city held its noise at a respectful distance. Saturday morning arrived the way the best ones do in late November, clear and cold. The kind of cold that feels honest rather than cruel. The sky a pale washed blue above the Hartford rooftops. I drove to Elm Street before 8, the truck heater running a thermos of coffee wedged between the seat and the center console. The blue door was propped open. Carolyn was behind the counter when I came in, pulling a fresh tray from the Blodgett, with the efficient, unhurried movements of a woman who had done this particular thing more times than she could count, and still did it with care. She looked up when the bell above the door rang, and this time, unlike every other Saturday morning, for the past 2 years, she smiled before she had a chance to decide whether to. It was a real smile. Wide and immediate and slightly surprised by itself, the smile of a person who is still getting used to being genuinely glad about something. "You're early," she said. "You're always open," I said. I sat at the counter, third stool from the right, same as always, and she set a cinnamon roll in front of me without being asked. The glaze was still warm. The bakery smelled like butter and November, and something I had no name for, except that it felt in a way I had stopped expecting to feel like arriving somewhere. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. Not about the petition, not about Roger, not about December. We talked about the bakery, about a new supplier she was considering for the holiday season, about a regular customer who had started leaving $5 tips with handwritten notes on the back of receipts, about the particular challenge of keeping the front window display looking intentional rather than just full. Small things. Real things. The kind of conversation that builds something without announcing it is building. When I finally stood to leave, Carolyn walked me to the door. She leaned against the frame with her arms folded loosely and looked at me with an expression I had come to recognize, the one that meant she was about to say something honest and was giving herself one last second to decide if she was brave enough. "I keep waiting for this to get complicated," she said. "It is complicated," I said. "I mean the wrong kind." She tilted her head slightly. "The kind where I find out something that changes the shape of it." I looked at her directly. "When that happens," I said, "and it will, you'll find out from me, not from anyone else." The expression on her face shifted, something opening up behind the eyes, cautious and warm at the same time. She nodded once. That was enough. I drove back across Hartford with both hands on the wheel and the particular calm of a man who has just said the most important true thing he has said in years. Monday morning, Harding Capital Group, 22nd floor. Jerry was already at the conference table. When I arrived at 8:15, his sleeves rolled up, 3 separate folders laid out in a row, with the organized precision of a man who had been in the office since before sunrise. Beside the folders, a printed spreadsheet ran 2 full pages, columns of numbers, account names, dates. He looked up when I walked in and pushed the first folder toward me without preamble. "Full financial disclosure," he said. "Everything. All 7 holdings, both REITs, the operating accounts, the Hartford Avenue property. Everything that exists under your name or any name connected to you." He tapped the cover page. $217 million in net assets. Verified, documented, legally clean. I sat down and opened the folder. The numbers were familiar. I had built each one of them over 20 years, one decision at a time. But seeing them assembled in a single document had a weight to it that the individual pieces never carried. $217 million. Built quietly, held carefully, kept invisible to everyone except Jerry and the accountants, and 2 attorneys who had signed confidentiality agreements before they shook my hand. Ethan thought I had $847,000. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "There's a correction on page 9, Jerry said, leaning across and pointing to a handwritten annotation in the margin. "The Providence LLC received funds from a holding account, not directly from Harding Capital operating funds. The distinction matters legally." He looked at me. "It means the exposure is smaller than it looked on first review." "How much smaller?" "Enough that a good attorney could argue it was a private transfer, not a corporate one." He paused. "Vincent Shade would know that. If he switched sides, and I think he has, he'll use it." "Let him," I said. "We don't need that angle. We have everything else." I closed the folder and slid it back to Jerry. Then I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. I pulled up the Meridian restaurant number and dialed. The hostess answered on the second ring. "This is Walter Harding," I said. "I'd like to reserve table 7 for the evening of December 12th, party of 10. I paused. "And I'd like to request Betty Winslow as our server if she's available that night." Jerry looked up from his folder when he heard Betty's name. Something moved across his face, recognition, and something more complicated underneath it. He set his pen down slowly and watched me finish the call. When I hung up, he said, "Betty Winslow. She's been at Meridian 22 years, I said. She knows things about that table that we don't." Jerry picked up his pen again. "December 12th, he said. "December 12th, I confirmed. Ethan called on a Wednesday morning at 9:04, and I let it ring twice before I picked up, not because I needed the time, but because I wanted to begin this particular conversation on my own terms. "Dad." His voice was warm in the practiced way it always was when he wanted something. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days." "I've been busy," I said. "Right, of course." A small pause, the pause of a man adjusting his approach in real time. "Listen, I wanted to say about the dinner last month. Troy was out of line. I should have shut it down faster." "Yes," I said. "You should have." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are we okay?" I looked out the window of my apartment, the Hartford skyline doing what it always did, indifferent and steady, the kind of backdrop that puts human anxieties into useful proportion. "We'll talk properly on December 12th, I said. "Meridian, table 7, 7 o'clock. I expect you there." The silence on the other end had texture to it, surprise recalculation, a flicker of something that might have been apprehension. "December 12th, he repeated. "Who else is coming?" "Everyone who needs to be." "Dad, 7 o'clock, Ethan." My voice was even and absolute. "Don't be late." I ended the call and immediately texted Pennington, December 12th. "Meridian, bring the filing." His reply came back in 90 seconds. "Ready." I texted Jerry the same information and added, "Bring the full packet." Jerry's response arrived before I had set the phone down, already printed. All 38 pages. I put the phone on the kitchen table and walked to the window. 2 pigeons landed on the ledge below and regarded the city with the blank, unhurried confidence of creatures that had never once doubted their right to be exactly where they were. I envied them that briefly, and then I straightened my collar and went to work. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with both envelopes in front of me, the one Sylvia had handed over days before and the second one that had been addressed to Ethan. I had read Celeste's letter 4 times by now. I knew every sentence by memory, but I read it one final time anyway, not because I needed new information, but because I needed to say goodbye to it as a source of pain before I could carry it into that room as something useful. When I finished, I folded it along its crease and slid it back into the envelope with the careful finality of a man closing a chapter. He has read long enough. I held it for a moment, small white, 8 years overdue, and felt the grief move through me the way it moves when you finally stop resisting it. Not a wave, more like weather. Present, then gradually less present, leaving the air a little cleaner than before. I placed the letter securely inside the drawer of my desk, locking it away until the night it would be needed. Then I picked up my phone and sent a message to a number I had not used in 3 months. December 12th. Meridian, 7 o'clock. Table 7. I expect you to be there. The red receipt appeared within seconds, faster than last time. A man who responds that quickly is a man who has been waiting. A man who has been waiting has already lost the only advantage he ever had. I set the phone face down on the table and looked out at the Hartford night. December 12th was 11 days away. I was ready. Ethan met Troy at a coffee shop on Farmington Avenue on a Thursday morning at 11:30, and I knew about it by noon. Not because I had someone watching. Because Madison told Carolyn, and Carolyn told me in that quiet, careful way she had developed for delivering information she knew would matter, without making it feel like surveillance, Jerry confirmed the rest through the PI report update that landed in my inbox at 2 that afternoon. Troy had been Ethan's sounding board since college, the kind of friend who tells you what you want to hear with enough confidence that it sounds like wisdom. According to Madison, who had been sitting in her car in the Farmington Avenue parking lot, waiting to pick Ethan up, the conversation had lasted 41 minutes. Ethan came out looking like a man who had gone in for reassurance and come out with a problem he hadn't brought with him. What Madison didn't know, what she told Carolyn in a second phone call that same afternoon, her voice pitched high and frightened, was what Ethan had done after he got back into the car. He had emailed Roger Briggs. He had told Roger about the December 12th dinner. The time, the restaurant, the table number. Everything. Carolyn called me at 4:47, and I could hear the tension in her voice from the first syllable, the tightly controlled, slightly breathless quality of a person delivering news they are still processing themselves. Madison called again, she said. She found the email on Ethan's laptop. He left it open. A short breath. Walter, he told Roger everything. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead and looked at the ceiling of my office for 3 full seconds. Not panic, not even surprise, not really. Just the specific, weary recognition of watching someone make the last in a long series of miscalculations. All right, I said. All right, her voice pitched slightly. Walter Roger is going to show up. Roger was already coming, I said. I texted him directly 2 days ago. He already knew about December 12th. Carolyn went quiet on the other end. The problem isn't that Ethan told Roger. The problem is that Roger now knows Ethan is involved, which means he'll walk in thinking he can use that crack. A pause. So Ethan just gave Roger a reason to walk in with a prepared story. Exactly, I said. Carolyn exhaled, long, slow, the exhale of a woman recalibrating. You are a very difficult man to rattle, she said. I've had practice, I said. How is Madison's? Terrified. She keeps saying she didn't know. She keeps saying it like if she says it enough times it becomes a full defense. Carolyn's voice softened slightly, not sympathy exactly, but the honest recognition of a woman who had once stood in a similar place. I think she's telling the truth. I think she married someone she thought she understood and found out too late that she only knew the surface of him. Tell her to call Pennington, I said, tonight, before she speaks to Ethan again. I already did, Carolyn said. She wrote the number down. After I hung up, I sat for a long time at my desk. The December light was going early outside the window, Hartford compressing itself into gray and amber as the afternoon folded into early evening. I thought about Ethan on that Farmington Avenue sidewalk, coming out of a coffee shop with a problem he hadn't walked in with. I thought about Roger Briggs reading my text message 4 days ago, I know about Providence, and now receiving an invitation through my son like a man who had been handed a lifeline he hadn't earned. Let Roger build his defense. Let Ethan believe he outsmarted me. The trap was already set, and every single player was moving exactly where I needed them to go. The days that followed crawled by in a tense, quiet countdown. Over the next week and a half, I met with Jerry in the early mornings finalizing the legal documents, while Carolyn kept a watchful eye on Madison's growing anxiety. Every chess piece was shifting into its final position. They thought they were prepared for a confrontation, but they had no idea what was actually waiting for them at that table. December 12th arrived the way important evenings always do, quietly without ceremony, the city going about its business as though nothing particular was scheduled to happen inside it. I stood at the bathroom mirror at 5:45 and put on my navy blazer. The same one. The one that had been to a funeral, a board meeting, and a September dinner where someone pushed a chair 6 inches from a table to make a point. I unlocked my desk drawer, took out Celeste's envelope, and slid it carefully into the breast pocket. I patted it once, feeling the weight of the past resting against my chest, and walked out. I arrived at Meridian at 6:48, 12 minutes early. I had asked Betty Winslow to meet me before the others arrived, and she was already there, standing near the service station, in her black server's uniform, silver hair pinned back, hands folded in front of her, with the unhurried composure of a woman who had been present for more significant evenings in this room than she had ever been credited for. "Mr. Harding," she said. "Betty." I shook her hand. "Thank you for being here. I've been waiting for this table to have a proper evening for a long time," she said simply. "No drama in it, just fact." I looked at her directly. "You know more about Table 7 than you've told anyone." She held my gaze with the steady eyes of a woman who had decided somewhere between the September dinner and now that the time for discretion had passed. "I know that your son reserved this table 3 times in the past 2 years," she said. "Different guests each time, different women." She paused. "I know that the chair at the far end was always pushed back before the guest arrived." My jaw tightened. "Always, always," she confirmed. "I straightened it twice. The third time I left it because I wanted to see if anyone would notice." She looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You noticed in under 30 seconds." I let that settle. Then, "I need you to be a witness tonight, Betty. Not a server, a witness. Can you do that?" She straightened her shoulders barely a centimeter, but I caught it. "I've been a witness for 22 years in this room," she said. "Tonight I just get to say so out loud." By 7 o'clock, Table 7 was full. Jerry sat to my left, the full 38-page packet in a leather folder on the chair brass beside him. Pennington sat at the far end wineglass untouched with the judicial stillness of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the proceedings to confirm it. Carolyn sat to my right in a dark green dress, her hair loose, her posture straight. Not the braced, defensive straight of the September dinner, but the straight of a woman who had decided she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ethan arrived at 7:02 with Madison 2 steps behind him. He scanned the table the way he always scanned a room, assessing, calculating, checking who held what position. When his eyes landed on Pennington, something flickered in his face. When they landed on the leather folder beside Jerry, the flicker became something colder. He sat down without saying hello to Carolyn. Madison sat beside him and placed both hands flat on the tablecloth and looked at nothing in particular, with the expression of a woman bracing for impact. Troy arrived at 7:05, helped himself to a bread roll before he sat and said, "Nice turnout." To the table in general. Nobody laughed. Betty moved through the first course with the quiet efficiency of someone performing 2 roles at once and managing both without visible effort. The conversation in the first 20 minutes was surface and careful. December weather, a highway project on I-84, the kind of talk that fills space when everyone at the table knows the real conversation is waiting in the next room. Ethan made 3 attempts to steer the evening toward normalcy. I let him make them. I needed him comfortable enough to be surprised. It was Pennington who shifted the air. He set down his fork at 7:28, reached into his jacket, and placed a single document on the table beside his bread plate. He did not slide it toward anyone. He simply left it there, face up, the Hartford Superior Court letterhead, visible from 6 feet away. "Ethan," Pennington said in the voice he used on the bench, not loud, not cold, simply absolute. "I'd like to talk about the conservatorship petition you filed on November 11th. Ethan's face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, then the attempt to manage surprise, then the failure of that attempt. His hand moved toward his water glass and stopped halfway. "Judge Pennington," he said carefully, "this isn't really the place." "Your father chose the place," Pennington said. I'd suggest you listen to why. Madison's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes flooded immediately, not slowly, not politely, and she pressed her fingers hard against her lips to hold in whatever was about to come out. Beside her, Ethan sat very still, the color leaving his face in the particular way it leaves when a man realizes the room he walked into was not the room he thought it was. I reached for my water glass, took one slow drink, and set it down. "Let's begin," I said. Pennington picked up the court document and slid it across the table to Ethan with the unhurried precision of a man who had delivered difficult information in formal settings for 4 decades and had never once needed to raise his voice to make it land. "Clause 7.3, he said. "Read it." Ethan looked at the page. His jaw worked slightly, the small, involuntary movement of a man processing something faster than his expression could keep up with. Madison leaned slightly toward him to read it too, and I watched her eyes move down the page and stop. "This is void," Ethan said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Under Connecticut General Statute 45A-650, yes," Pennington said. "It has been void since the day Vincent Shade filed it." Mr. Shade knew this. He chose not to correct it. He folded his hands on the table. "The petition collapses on procedural grounds before it reaches a judge's desk. It always did." Ethan set the page down. He looked at me directly, for the first time since he had walked in, and his face held something I had not seen on it in years. Not the performance of a son managing his father. Something rawer than that. Something that looked almost like a boy who had just realized the plan he had believed in completely had never been as solid as he thought. "You knew," he said. "For 3 weeks," I said. His throat moved. "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted you to have the chance to choose differently." I kept my voice even and without heat. "You had 3 weeks to come to me. You didn't come." Madison made a sound, small and voluntary, the sound of something breaking quietly inside a person who has been holding themselves together through sheer determination. Her eyes were streaming now, mascara moving in thin lines down her cheeks, and she pressed both hands flat on the tablecloth and stared at them as though they belonged to someone else. "I didn't know about the filing," she said to no one in particular. "I want someone at this table to know that I did not know." "Madison," Pennington's voice was not unkind. "I believe you. So does Walter." She looked up at me, desperate, searching, and I nodded once. It was enough. She pressed her fingers over her eyes and breathed. Jerry reached for the leather folder. He opened it to the first tab and placed the document face up at the center of the table, not in front of Ethan. Specifically, not in front of anyone, just at the center where everyone could see it. The cover page read, "Harding Capital Group Full Asset Disclosure. Prepared. November 2025. Troy leaned forward and read the first line. Whatever expression he had been wearing for the past 40 minutes left his face completely and did not come back. $217 million, Jerry said. Flat factual the way Jerry said everything that mattered. Net assets verified legally clean. 7 holdings, 2 real estate investment trusts, the Hartford Avenue property. And he looked at Ethan. Not 847,000. 217 million. The table went very still. "You thought I had less than $1 million, I said. "You thought I was manageable. You thought Roger Briggs had given you leverage and Vincent Shade had given you a legal instrument, and together they were enough." I glared across the table at my son. "And you thought you were brilliant, didn't you, staging this pathetic matchmaking dinner?" You deliberately chose Carolyn because of her heavier build, assuming that because she was an overweight woman, her presence would embarrass me. You thought I would lose my temper, storm out, or publicly humiliate her, giving you the perfect tantrum to record and present to a judge as proof of my erratic, aggressive behavior for your conservatorship file. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a dangerously sharp whisper. You tried to use a good woman's insecurities as a weapon to destroy your own father. You were wrong about her, and you were dead wrong about me. Ethan's chin dropped toward his chest. His shoulders pulled inward. And then quietly, without warning, without any of the performance that had surrounded every other emotion he had shown tonight, he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, and his eyes went glassy and wet, and the sound that came out of him was the sound of someone who had just run out of road. It was Madison who reached for his arm. Not with anger, not with "I told you so," just with her hand on his forearm steady and present, the gesture of a woman who had decided that whatever her husband had done, he was still her husband, and she was not going to let him fall apart alone at a dinner table. I looked away from them. I needed a moment to put something back in order inside my own chest before I trusted what I would say next. It was then that Betty Winslow stepped forward from the service station. She moved to the edge of the table with the quiet authority she always carried. Unhurried, certain, the posture of a woman who had been waiting 22 years for the right moment and had no intention of missing it now that it had arrived. She reached into the pocket of her server's apron and placed a small envelope on the table beside my hand. "This was left at this table," she said. Her voice was low and clear. "Table 7, 8 years ago. By a woman who said if Walter Harding ever sat here again, I should give it to him." My heart stopped for one full beat. I looked at the envelope. Small, white, sealed. No name on the outside, but the handwriting on the back flap, 2 initials, small and slightly rushed, was handwriting I would recognize anywhere on earth. C.H. Celeste Harding. My hand moved to it before I had told it to. My fingers touched the edge of the envelope and held it there, not opening it, not pulling it toward me, just holding the fact of its existence for one long moment while the table held its breath around me. Carolyn's hand found my arm beneath the table, warm, steady, present, saying nothing because nothing was required. I picked up the envelope and held it against my chest. "Thank you, Betty," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended, and I did not apologize for it. Betty nodded, once the nod of a woman whose job in this room was finally, after 22 years, complete. The door opened at 7:51. Roger Briggs walked in without knocking. Dark coat hair combed the careful posture of a man who had rehearsed his entrance on the drive over and was now discovering that the room he had prepared for was not the room he had walked into. He stopped inside the doorway and took in the table in one slow sweep. Pennington at the far end, Jerry's leather folder open at the center, Ethan still holding Celeste's letter with both hands, Madison's mascara tracked down both cheeks. His eyes landed on Carolyn last. Something moved through his face recognition calculation, and underneath both of those the particular discomfort of a man confronting something he had believed he had already finished with. "Roger," I said, "sit down." He crossed the room and sat in the empty chair at the far end of the table, the same chair that had been pushed 6 inches from the edge on a September evening 3 months ago, the chair arranged to make a woman feel unwelcome in a room before she had spoken a single word. He did not appear to notice the significance. I noticed it for him. Jerry opened the folder to the final tab without being asked. He slid a single page across the white tablecloth toward Roger, smooth, efficient, the motion of a man who had been waiting to do exactly this for a long time. "Providence LLC," Jerry said. 4 wire transfers, $47,000, January 2014 through March 2015. Your registration, your accounts, your signature on the operating agreement. He tapped the page once with 2 fingers. We have the complete paper trail. Roger looked at the page. The composure he had walked in with began to leave his face the way heat leaves a room gradually, then all at once. His jaw tightened. His throat moved. He looked up at me with the eyes of a man searching for an exit that had already been closed. I want to speak to an attorney, he said. Vincent Shade contacted Judge Pennington's office this morning, I said. He is no longer available to you. Roger's face went the color of the tablecloth. He turned to Ethan, the instinct of a man looking for the ally he believed he still had, and found something he had not expected. Ethan was looking back at him with red-rimmed eyes and an expression stripped of everything except the raw, unmanaged understanding of a son who had finally grasped how he had been used. You told me it was a private investment, Ethan said. His voice cracked down the middle on the last word. You told me Dad would never find out. You told me it was just money moving between friends. He pressed the letter flat against the table with one shaking hand. You used me to get inside his accounts. You used my mother to authorize the transfers. His chin trembled once quickly before he caught it. She spent the last years of her life trying to fix what you helped her do wrong. Roger opened his mouth. Don't, Pennington said. One word delivered in the tone he had used on the bench for 40 years. Roger closed his mouth. Pennington reached into his jacket and placed a second document on the table beside his wineglass. I will be filing a formal referral to the Connecticut State Bar regarding Vincent Shade's conduct, he said, and I will be submitting the Providence documentation to the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit on Monday morning. Given the interstate nature of the transfers, Hartford to Providence, I will also be forwarding a copy to the FBI Hartford field office. He looked at Roger directly. I suggest you find representation before then. Competent representation. Roger pushed back his chair and stood. His hands were not steady. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and walked to the door without looking at anyone, not at Ethan, not at Carolyn, not at the folder that held 3 years of his decisions laid out in clean documented rows. He paused at the door for one breath, hand on the frame. Then he walked out. The room exhaled. Ethan looked at his hands. Madison reached over and covered them with hers, both of them all at once, the way you cover something you are not willing to leave uncovered. He turned to her, and his face collapsed completely, the last of the composure dissolving into something honest and exhausted and young. She pulled him close and held on and did not say a word, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already say better. I gave them that moment. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small velvet box on the tablecloth beside Carolyn's hand. She looked down at it, then up at me. The color rose in her face immediately, and her eyes went wide and bright, and the tears came before she had any chance to stop them spilling freely, running warm down her cheeks in the amber light. The kind of tears that arrive not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming recognition of something you had stopped letting yourself want. Walter, she breathed. 3 months ago, I said someone pushed your chair away from this table to make you feel like you didn't belong here. My voice was rough, and I did not smooth it out. I want you at every table I sit at for the rest of my life. Her hand shook as she reached for the box. She opened it slowly, and when she saw the ring inside, the sound that came out of her was half laugh and half sob, bright and broken and completely, absolutely real. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and laughed again, fuller this time, her whole face opening up, the composed and careful woman from September entirely gone, replaced by just Carolyn, just herself, laughing and crying and nodding before I had even finished asking. I put the ring on her finger. At the edge of the room, Betty Winslow folded her hands in front of her and allowed herself the smile she had been holding back for 22 years of evenings at this table. Outside, Hartford went on. Inside table 7, something that had been broken for a very long time was quietly, completely whole. I am 53 years old, and I nearly lost everything, not to a stranger, but to my own son. That is the part nobody warns you about. Family betrayal does not kick the door in. It sits across from you at dinner, smiles warmly, and pushes someone else's chair 6 inches from the table while you are still deciding whether to say something. I was not innocent in this. I was a man who chose work over presence, distance over conversation, silence over the harder thing. I gave Ethan a father he could not reach, and he filled that space with the wrong people. I am not excusing what he did. I am saying I handed him some of the material he used. So if you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, hear me, clearly do not wait. Do not let the people you love carry your truth for 8 years in a pharmacy drawer, because the moment never felt right. I believe God gives us exactly enough time, not one day more than we need. Do not spend it building walls and calling it strength. Family revenge is not a plan. It is a consequence. And family betrayal is rarely a single decision. It is 100 small ones made in the silence between people who stopped talking honestly a long time ago. Do not be like me. Say the thing. Pull the chair in. Show up before December. If this story moved something in you, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and stay close for what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very last word. That matters more than I can say. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and conversation. If that is not what you are looking for, no judgment, only grace. Choose what serves you.